all here. So, Jeff, if you could share the agenda, and we can start with that.
Give me 1 second.
Okay. I think the first item on the agenda is really just to check in on process and products, and if anybody has any questions about that. And one thing maybe I'll just share, because I think, Carter, you were out for the last meeting. These are public meetings, and there isn't a time for public comment in these meetings. We do that at our general full commission meetings, but they are public meetings, and we do have a few people that are not commissioners, which I don't think we talked about earlier. So that's a little bit on process that you missed, I think, when you were out. But
Okay.
Any other questions about process or information or resources?
Is there a way to know who they are?
Say that again.
Is there a way to know who the non-committee
Yeah,
or the
you should
members
be
of the
able to
public are?
see. You should be able to see the names of the folks that are joining us.
Okay.
Commissioner Lim.
Oh, hi everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh, I just had a couple questions about process, and before we get to the main, I can see by the agenda the main topic of our time. I received an email from Jeff shortly before this meeting about, he provided a link to some of us about the agency information. Is that a public link? That's one question I have. It was a link to something called agency input received. Is that is that going to be put on a public document,
Yes.
public website?
Commissioner Lam, that document is found on the website. It's on the commission website. So
Oh, it's already there.
Yep. That's why we
Okay.
provided that link, is so that you'd have access to it a lot easier than having
Is it
attached
possible just
document.
to put it in the chat?
Mhm.
Also,
We can
just
do
for,
that.
because I can see that even though we're not having public comment, there are people following this meeting as well.
We can do that.
Yeah. It's I think we were a little uncertain about the process originally when we set this up with the commission, but these are public meetings, and all the materials that you get, that everybody else will get as well.
But okay, I wasn't, it might not be super easy to find that document on the website. I just did a quick look, and it was, I see the agenda for this meeting on the website, but maybe is it possible just to drop the link into the chat?
Yes, I'm working on that right now.
Okay, and then if I could, can I just say something before we get to the meat of things? Because I do feel like we're sort of learning as we go. I certainly am. Again, this is my first year on the commission. I'm also been trying to understanding sort of what the role is. I think I'm getting a clear picture of what the role of the commission is. And I feel like one of the roles of the commission is to sort of both, communicate, in a public meeting setting but also to sort of hear what stakeholders might be saying. We did have some comments at the last full commission meeting. So I wanted to at least take a moment to say something just to summarize my understanding of things, because I think I might have even had a misunderstanding about our role that I think over time I've been getting a clear picture of. If I could just take a minute, if people are okay with that.
Absolutely.
So for the transportation sector, which is what this committee is about, the picture I have now in my mind is that there are actually 4 different state agencies, at least, that are actually involved in developing and actually implementing many of the existing programs related to the transportation sector. So Oregon DOT, Department of Energy, Department of Environmental Quality, and I would also note DCLD. Sort of what's, I think, worth noting, at least it seemed to me for me to understand it, is that the Climate Action Commission actually doesn't develop the details of a policy. We're sort of collating information. We're sort of bringing together information. And so oftentimes we're seeking that information from the other agencies that are the implementing agencies. So for example, to me, it was really helpful to see the information with the Department of Environmental Quality. And that was super helpful information when we were able to receive it and understand, you know, update there. And it reminded me, like, there are rulemakings that an environmental agency, that the DEQ will do. And so what I'm trying to suggest is that there are actually multiple venues where some of this work around the transportation sector gets worked out and hashed out over time. So like if DEQ is having a rulemaking on a potential regulation, that's the venue. That's what I want to say. Like we're not actually the venue for DEQ rulemaking. We're sort of seeing the results at the end of that in terms of a policy that's adopted. And then we're sort of putting things together. At least that's the picture of what I'm trying to understand is sort of like what's been already put together and is already in place from at least 4 different state agencies.
Yeah, I would say we're not just looking at it after the work is done. We're also saying here are things that should be addressed, either by the legislature or by the executive branch. So I think we can weigh in. Our big job is to really look across all of the different needs and agencies and try and come up with recommendations that look across that and provide some additional information. The forecast is ours. That's not something that any other agency is targeted with doing. But many other agencies have responsibilities for climate action. So we're really trying to. Our big job is to track progress, make recommendations on next steps, and hopefully to represent that overall need. So that's
Absolutely.
the way
Thank
I
you.
describe it.
No, thank you for saying that, Chair, and I agree and I follow what you're saying there. But I'm just suggesting that there are multiple venues where
Yes.
a lot of the work of the transportation sector gets worked out, and that's why it was super helpful. That's why I asked if that link could be made public for people to see the information from the various
Yeah.
agencies. Let me
No,
just stop there. Let me
it's a
stop
really
there.
great point. And
Yeah.
one of the things I think we should think about in the coming year is, can we do more to connect with the other agencies and commissions on what we think is important. So it's not something we've done a lot of in the past, but I think we could do more of it in the future. So Commissioner Steckler.
Yeah, thank you so much. Commissioner Lem, I also was thinking about the different agencies that are involved with this, but also kind of thinking about how they implement the policies and the programmatic issues. But very high in my mind is also kind of the pricing component, those revenue related tools that all of these agencies or the legislature is really grappling with in this particular, in the next session as they're thinking about pricing. And of course, I often, and many economists, not that I am one, but many economists would say that, pricing is one of the most efficient tools for really, achieving some of the goals, sending those pricing signals, either by incentivizing specific types of activities or disincentivizing other kinds of activities. And I just really hope, especially given the governor's work group right now that is thinking about transportation pricing, that we can weigh in on that, and that our recommendations will include, how are we as a state incentivizing, how do we pay for the things that we have said are important and really reflect our values as a state, And so that's always been kind of in the back of my head as well as we're thinking about this particular work.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And I haven't listened to all of the meetings of that work group, but I think it would be good for us to weigh in sooner rather than later with them about the importance of thinking about climate mitigation. There is a subgroup that's focused on transit and alternative transportation options, but there's no group that's thinking about mitigation specifically. So I think that might be something that we should talk about at our September meeting and maybe encourage that there should be more thought given to climate mitigation as part of transportation, and just make the point, it's the biggest piece of our emissions. So
absolutely, I think it's both on the very explicit transportation funding, but also the CPP as well, and what, if any changes are made to that particular program, thinking about the pricing of fuels. And again, what kind of signals are we sending through those, that revenue generation?
Yes. Any other just quick things about process or information? When we're going to come back to this at the end of the meeting in terms of additional information that you might have that you might want, but just anything to kick the meeting off. Okay. I really appreciated all of the work that you all put into pulling together ideas, and we all kind of approached it a little differently, but collectively, I thought it was a really good beginning for this group, and just really appreciated all the work that you all put in. So thank you. Maybe we can take this down and then pull up the recommendations. Oh,
Chair,
sorry.
What?
Yeah.
Just, I'm sorry to back up on process, but can you remind us of the timing on when this group needs to have their final recommendation to the full committee?
So we are going to be looking at draft recommendations at our September 11th meeting.
Oh.
And we don't have to, I know, we don't have to have everything nailed down, but just, like, here are the big topic areas. And in particular, like, one of the things for this committee is that the report that we heard in April from ODOT, they won't be presenting to their commission until the 15th. So after our date. So we might have to have some placeholders on details, but I think we can go ahead and do as much as we can, but recognize that they'll be drafty, and we'll talk about them.
Right.
And then we're anticipating trying to finalize in mid-October. We have talked about the fact that we might need another meeting in October, late October, to finalize some of the ones that are a little questionable or that we need more information on.
So the outcome of today is that general list of recommendations?
The outcome today is really trying to make sure we've got all the topics covered, and and then any information that we need to either support those, or if there's a topic that we're not quite sure about whether it should be on or off, that we would want more information to get to that point. And Jeff, anything I should have mentioned that I didn't?
The only thing I would add, Chair, is that there were some questions and requests for data related to transportation in some of the emails that came in. And so know that some of that information we can point you to, and we're still working on kind of sorting through that. And then some of the information might take a little longer. So stay tuned, and we'll be updating you with information as we're able to collect it.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. And just a point of order. Some of what we've talked about at commission meetings and in this committee meeting, the first meeting of our committee, you know, everybody would love more information to define what we're going to recommend. And, you know, we'll be able to address some of those needs, and we won't be able to address some of those needs. It's just where we are in terms of information availability. So we'll do the best we can to address those needs, but just recognize that we always, you know, like in any decision that any of us are making, you know, we always want more information, and sometimes it's not out there yet. So that might be a recommendation, is get the information, or it might just be that we're going to take the best shot we can at this. Okay. Let's see, let's go back to Jeff, can you share the list of recommendations and we can kind of talk through? So in terms of the things that I, you know, thought were helpful, here's the list of input that that we, I think, between all of us that we looked at. So it was, you know, our report from 2024, which really built on our first ticker project and the roadmap to 2030. The energy strategy, which has a lot of great information in it and good recommendations. We got a presentation from the monitoring of the state transportation strategy last April. We had a panel presentation to the commission in May. We've heard public testimony at several meetings. And then, you know, we've got some early findings of the visioning group that were all things that I think we could think about. And then I think we've recognized that why it's really important for us to highlight transportation is that, you know, we've got, you know, it's the biggest source of emissions, and you know, we're not really meeting that. And I think we'll see in September that that, you know, we've got ways to go relative to the update of this monitoring of the strategy. And then it'll be a big focus of the 2027 legislative session, because we need to address financing. And then so there'll be a lot of focus on that. So that's kind of the backdrop. And then I think going through some of the different pieces that we all identified, clearly sustainable transportation revenue tools, in particular for us, that focus on electrification, transit, active transportation, multimodal, and rail service are the ones that I think tie in most particularly to our mission as a commission. Well, why don't we go through all these and then we can come back and kind of that people kind of packaged things differently, which and I think we will think about how to package things, but you know, I think there was a lot of commonality about investing in transit and alternative modes of transportation. And so we had kind of a big topic, and then, some specifics that came in from folks. And I'm not sure exactly how these are organized, Jeff, but maybe down to there's a different discussion relative to land use and transportation planning that came up from one of our commissioners. We also talked about increasing market demand, and in particular, that there are opportunities with light, and I think some emphasis on medium and heavy duty vehicles. We had some input that talked in particular about being focused on rural areas and freight, and I don't know that those go together necessarily, but those were two important themes, was just really thinking about how we address rural areas and freight. We had and then I think some questions about clean fuels and what might need to be done around that. We've heard a lot from folks around vehicle miles traveled, and how can we really accelerate reduction in vehicle miles traveled. And part of that, I think, is potentially a fix it first policy, and the other way to talk about that is kind of preserving, maintaining, and making use of the existing transportation system. And then one of the things that came up, again, how we organize these can be figured out later, but really tried to do a better job of looking at new transportation investments, and to really have a better sense of a process to look at the cost and benefits of any new construction, and improve greenhouse gas modeling. And then in our last report, we included kind of material management of really trying to extend the Oregon by clean law to have kind of some additional sideboards on what we should be thinking about. Commissioner Lem.
Sorry,
You're on
I
mute.
was
Yeah.
I was muted. Sorry.
That's okay.
This is super helpful to see the synthesis, and again, thank you, Jeff, and others who've been providing all the information and the synthesis. Would it make sense for us to just go through the document and have any comment or discussion, maybe, since you've walked through it, Chair?
Yeah, I think so. Let's talk to, or let's hear what Commissioner Steckler has to say, and then we can.
Well, I was going to start with number one, if that's okay. If I was going to start with one comment.
Yeah, that's okay. Let's just hear from Commissioner Steckler first, and
please
see if you're on mute too. You're still on mute.
We can't hear you. There you go.
So sorry about that. I put my hand down and was like, I'm ready to go. So Commissioner Lem, I think it's kind of complimentary. As I was looking at the list, I'm wondering, I also did a lot of reading through both the Oregon Transportation Plan and Every Mile Counts and a number of other kind of like background materials. And I struggled a little bit to be like, there's in each of those plans, they say, here's kind of our goals or strategies or kind of this overarching outcomes we're looking for. And the one that seemed like it was as simplistic to me was from the Oregon Transportation Plan on page 100. It really
Yeah.
said like the outcomes we're looking for is to reduce vehicle miles traveled per capita by 20% and then transition to cleaner vehicles and fuels, reducing CO2e per mile by 77%. And it feels like most everything like in the gap measures, like just about everything is supportive of that. And so just as a way of kind of organizing the recommendations, I wonder, I think there's probably some overarching, and I would say on the pricing side, there's both the revenue generating or the providing of incentives that I think applies to all the categories, as well as, and I guess I want to come back to this too, kind of improving the greenhouse gas modeling, or really any of the modeling that the state has to use, especially as they incorporate it into transportation system plans, because from what I understand, and again, I'm still getting myself up to speed, there are assumptions back from the statewide transportation strategy, the STS, that now are no longer very accurate at all. Fleet turnover, what we're assuming for greenhouse gas reductions, other things as well. So there's a few things I think that are just top level and apply to everything. And then there's things that go under that, reducing BMT, and then there's some others that are that transition to cleaner fuels. So that would be, as we kind of talk about this and rethink about it, that might help to really organize how we communicate the recommendations that we're making.
Do you feel like some of the assumptions that were made back in 2012 when the strategy was developed would lead us to completely different ways of prioritizing, or is it more just how we make the case, or both?
Maybe a little bit of both. I think it gets more into the nuts and bolts of how we understand the problem and how we scale the solutions to those problems, and making it more relevant and more accurate for today's conditions, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I could, I'd actually,
Yeah.
I agree with
Commissioner
I agree with some of what Commissioner Steckler is saying. My suggestion, if somebody's taking notes or working with this document as we talk, my suggestion would simply be, if we go up to the top of this document, if this is the document, say, to be passed to the overall committee or to be integrated with other writing from other subgroups, is to go to the top and to have a general section, to have a more general section. If you go, can you go to the very top of the document? I don't know if you can scroll to see.
Yep.
But and what I would actually say, so I think what both Commissioner Steckler and I, part of us at least, in terms of our background, we have an analysis background. So I think she might say something a certain way, I might say it slightly different, but the same idea. Traditionally in transportation, we, at least in my experience, we talk about three legs of the stool. You say there's different ways to say it. You say there's vehicles, there's fuels, and then there's travel activity. Or another way to say it, which is the way that Commissioner Steckler framed it in her piece, which I looked at, was you can look at the travel, which is VMT related or activity related, and then you can talk about carbon intensity of per mile. So I think so she sort of framed it as those two things. So to me, the three legs of the stool, the carbon intensity per unit of activity, per unit of travel, is basically the vehicles and the fuels components. But in general, my suggestion then would just be, before jumping right to the recommendations, that we have a general section, like an overview section. And what I would actually recommend, because I'm comfortable, I've come to enough reading and understanding now that I think our general direction for the transportation sector for the state of Oregon is good, and it's got a lot of good things in it. And we're sort of working on the margins to suggest some marginal improvements. But I actually feel, having had a chance to understand things better, having heard all the presentations and the written materials, that Oregon is a leader. We should say that Oregon is a leader in climate change policy and in the transportation sector. We've had a history of being a leader. I think we should say some good general things because I actually think the general direction is good. We're just working on the margin and we might have discussion and debate about, you know, changes and improvements. But that's another reason why I think some general section would be helpful.
Yeah, I'm not sure I completely agree with
Right.
your broad topic or your broad point, but absolutely, the narrative of the report will have, a lot of positive things to say about the progress we've made. It'll have positive things to say about the CPP, which, is the most directed at the transportation sector. So this wasn't intended to be the whole piece around transportation. It's really just to focus in on kind of how we got our heads around the recommendations piece. So I don't know if that
Okay,
helps,
well,
but
I can go to
definitely, I think your
yeah.
points are well taken, and we should definitely make sure that between the narrative and the intro section, depending on how that gets organized, that we recognize that we've made some good progress, or we have some good pieces in place to address that.
And that's okay. I'm just, I can go to individual items and I'm just trying to say any individual comments I would have are on the margins and I've written them down. So everything I generally
Okay.
plan to say would be, but I do have some quibbles. I think this is a first draft. And so I
Oh,
think it would be helpful
yeah.
for us to work through.
It's not even a first draft. It's just
Yeah.
bullet
So,
points, right?
so one example, if I could, just to get the ball rolling, and I'm sorry, Commissioner Nichols, if we can go to number one where it says about transit, one of the comments I had in my written comments was, I agree with this, but I think it's capital. If you go down to bullet number 2 and 3, actually, I think that we are missing an opportunity, 1A and 1B, I mean, by being so focused on capital improvement with transit. If you're following sort of the news and what's going on currently, for example, TriMet is cutting staff. And part of that is because there have been very significant changes in transit usage following COVID. And so I think it would be helpful for us to also say that it would be good if the state legislature could consider policies that not just build capital, but also promote the use of transit. So I put in my written
Yeah.
example, for example, fare subsidies or partnership programs. My employer has a partnership program with TriMet that encourages employees. It makes it so much easier for us to buy a pass. So I think there's oftentimes a lot of emphasis on the capital money to build the transit and the other modal options. But I think that to be helpful to the climate goal, we could and should say something in addition to capital by saying promote usage.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's a really good point. I appreciate that. Commissioner McNichol.
Yeah, I'd like to go back up if we could to the general section
Yep.
because I think we need to state right up front that 40% of our emissions come from transportation. The goal we have set is not aggressive enough to get us where we need to be, and we're not meeting the goal that we've set. I
Yeah.
mean, that is the overlying fact here is that we're not on target in this sector
Yeah.
and some of that's because of the state, some of it's because of CAP-A standards and blah, 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 all this other stuff, right? That I think Tigger's pointed out, Tiger, whatever you call it. And so I think we need to be clear about that right up front and that our recommendations, in my opinion, should be, and while we've made some good progress, we haven't made enough. And we're not on
Yep.
target to get to where we need to be. And so I believe it was somewhere maybe in here or somewhere else. I think Jeff's comment that all of our recommendations should be addressed at reducing carbon emissions. And So anyway, I think we
Yeah.
need to make a stronger, and we need to get words out of there like it may not be, because we know it's not. And we need to not equivocate on this, because the
Good point.
legislature is not going to be focused on this issue. They're going to be focused on how to pay for bridges and roads and potholes. And so we need to find a way to get their attention and get this in front of them in a meaningful way that they may pay attention to it in their process.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I don't think we should wait for that until this report is out. I think we should
Well, that's true.
step into it sooner, even. Commissioner Steckler.
Yeah, one of the questions I've had too is also thinking about the time frame. So while we definitely want to talk about kind of longer term trends, but I'm assuming this is, here's what's happened since the last time we reported to you. So, over the last 2 years, X, Y, and Z has happened, or we have made this progress, or we haven't made that progress. And so, so thinking about changes to VMT that have really been flat or a little bit have actually been slightly increasing per capita, or transit funding that has finally we're seeing very detrimental impacts on transit funding, things of that nature. Like how much emphasis in the report are we putting on the last 2 years to then help to articulate like how that compounds with anything else that's kind of happening even longer term?
Yeah, I've thought about this a fair amount. I think we have to kind of think about the key audience for this, which is the legislature, and people are coming into the legislature now, don't have a lot of history. So I think we kind of have to give that broad history, but also I think provide, to your point and to some of the points from public testimony, it's talk about what's happened in the last few years. I don't know that it needs to be since our last report necessarily, but certainly, there's been so much conversation about transportation in the last couple of years that and I don't think a lot of that is focused on climate mitigation, which
Almost
is
none.
yeah, almost none. So I think trying to press that, I think will be important. That's a finding that we really need to push, not just in this section, but throughout the whole report. Okay, do we want to start walking through?
So I guess a question about the overall, I think that the suggestion that we have this that we kind of have a general section and then we talk about what we're doing about VMTs and what we're doing about clean fuels makes a lot of sense, because those are the things that can move the needle, right? And
Yeah,
some of these smaller things, like I agree with the land use planning comment, for instance, but it's not going to move the needle in a way that we're, the clean fuels program is, as an example. So, I mean, I don't know, so organizing these and prioritizing them in some way, they seem a bit random the way they're presented, but not that's, and I know they were not intended to be final, so.
right. Yeah,
Figuring
no,
out how to
I
organize
think I think your point's very well taken, and our next step would be to kind of start to talk about priorities within these. And I really appreciated Commissioner Sievers, you did a really nice job of kind of saying, here's how I thought about it. And then you prioritized each of the specific things that you identified. And, I think we need to get there. I don't think we need to necessarily get there today. We need to really identify if we miss some big things. And I don't know that this is the easiest way to look at all of this, but, revenue tools and incentives, which can all be kind of nested under revenue tools for the things that are going to help us from a mitigation perspective is really important. We've been pretty tied to gas tax, and that only allows us to invest in the roadways and doesn't really help us. We've got payroll taxes that have been helping with transit, but the things that I heard from listening to the transportation visioning group is just that, things like rail service and transit are just, the costs are outstripping the fees that we have to fund those.
Yeah.
So I think a sustainable funding piece is an important piece for us to highlight. Are there any concerns about including a recommendation like that?
Absolutely not. I think the devil's in the details.
Yeah, fair enough.
I think I'd be more concerned if we didn't. And I would suggest at least making this first kind of top level one, just about both making sure that we have those. And I use revenue tools generally to talk about, it's Origo, it's the payroll tax, it's any other, specific, it's any of those tools that are used to generate revenue. And then also incentive programs generally, just understanding that it's more than just charging people money, but it's potentially paying for the things that we really value. And then really getting in. So I guess I wouldn't put the invest in transit, walking, bicycling under that one. I would put it under, that's really related to reducing VMT. Or,
Got it.
if we decided,
Yeah.
I think it's more like almost like the program is under those other elements, but this is the more general one. It just feels a little cleaner in my mind.
Yeah, so I guess also we've combined revenue tools and incentives. Now, I think revenue tools means taxes, right? So, I mean, and incentives means investing those tax revenues into make things happen. So those are kind of different things I think in my mind.
I guess I would just argue that the incentives, it's the flip side of you charge for something here, say congestion tax, and then the incentives are it's your fiscal tool that you're using to have the thing happen. So I still think of both of them as a fiscal tool. And when I worked at Eco Northwest, that's the way that we talked about it. And so that's why I would suggest pushing those together.
The only thing is, does that cloud it for the, I won't use an adjective, for the legislature, who are easily clouded by mixing two issues together? That's just my, I totally get what you're saying.
We want the story to be easy to understand.
Right, and their focus is on coming up with a new way to fund transportation, and we want them to incorporate all this stuff. We want to incorporate electrification, transit, blah blah blah, to advance state climate and equity goals. That needs to be part of that deal. We also, as part of that, will need incentives to get people to behave differently. And so anyway, it's probably a fine point.
I think what I'm taking away from it is they're both really important, and they probably both need to be equal in some form or fashion. Whether it's exactly how we organize it, I think we can figure out. But I like the idea that, or I like the idea that these are maybe two concepts that were merged together that maybe shouldn't be, but could potentially connect elsewhere. Commissioner Seepers? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, as I think you're right in, let's make sure the legislature understands the purpose. And so when we're talking about incentives, say for electric vehicles, then we definitely have that conversation kind of under, that transition to clean vehicles. So it might be a that and, but I'm totally, whatever's the cleanest conversation to have, I'm on board to have it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Hey, Commissioner Stevens.
The key word that I was thinking of was how to simplify the verbiage so that they could understand what our thrust was.
Yeah.
And I guess one of the follow-up questions, just looking at this document, is how many pages are we expecting for transportation to be in the, in the document? And then what would our target be for how many? I mean, maybe we've got 10 items right now. So after number 5, they're going to stop reading. So on one hand, to combine the economic, both the income and the output in one item makes sense, so they could understand the payment and what we're spending it on. So to reduce the number of, I guess, topics we're trying to prioritize.
That's a great point. I'm not sure we have to land on that today, because I think, but it's a really important point for us to think about the broad conversation that we want to have. We had 32 recommendations in our last report. I think we wanted to try and be a little more targeted in this one. But we've currently got energy, transportation, and natural climate solutions as the 3 big topic areas. And then we have some cross-cutting things like, the CPP versus a carbon cap and invest program, and some cross-cutting things. So, exactly how we end up organizing them, I think we don't have to worry about too much, as long as we agree that we need some revenue tools that are specific to and can be used to do the kinds of things that are going to reduce emissions, and we need incentives. So if we kind of agree on both components of that, I think we can kind of figure out how to best coordinate that as we go.
I like Commissioner Seaver's comment about keep it simple. Well, which is hard to do because it's not a simple topic, right?
No, that's for sure.
It's not hard to lose the legislature in the morass of detail either. So,
okay.
So if I could share one more comment, I think what's hit me a lot is the high level item on the Tigger report, but then you have all the tasks that support it. So if we could somehow think of the general comment or theme we're trying to affect, and then we could have some of these items be almost like those Tigger level task items that support the higher level item.
I think that's
a possibility.
Point. Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And, one of the things that we need to dig in on, not this committee, I don't think, but the report committee, is what do we do about goals, given that we've got this increasing data center demand, and how are we going to deal with that? But that's not for today's discussion.
Yeah, it's probably not a transportation issue, but yeah. Okay.
Jeff, I'm not quite sure how you organize these. I think the stable and equitable funding kind of is part of the
Chair,
one topic.
I just took the document that you shared with me. You sent me, and I essentially just took everybody else's recommendations and nested them in under those existing headers where appropriate. So,
okay.
Yeah, definitely there's some lumping and splitting that needs to happen here for sure.
Okay. And then in terms of prioritization, I guess we certainly could talk about that. And I think Commissioner McNichol, you talked about the fact that maybe land use and transportation planning was something lower on your list anyway.
But it falls under one of the, Commissioner Steckler, could you restate those 2 items from page 100 of the STS?
You bet I sure can. And being the land use planner,
those were really clear to me. That's something that I think that is a simple summary that the legislature might actually be able to grasp.
Yeah, well, I definitely hold on to where I can quantify something. So in the Oregon Transportation Plan, I found on page 100, they had two, I think, specific performance targets, key performance targets that they describe, and it was reduce passenger vehicle miles traveled per capita by 20%, and then transition to cleaner vehicles and fuels and reduce CO2e per mile by 77%. I'm not sure exactly how they got to those percentages, but as a kind of like what are the big ticket items? And I guess that was the order that they put them in the report, but kind of getting back to priorities when it comes to what's probably going to have the biggest impact on reducing emissions, I might put transition to cleaner vehicles and fuels first, but I would definitely, you can't get to reducing VMT without what you call mode shift, like getting people kind of out of cars and walking, biking, and taking transit. And you can't do that if those are all trips that are relatively short. Those are the easy ones to do if you're going a shorter distance. It's more likely that you're going to be able to walk, bike, or take transit. And so that the transport or the land use patterns that we're putting on the ground that is implemented through the CFEC rules, and even Oregon's land use planning program with urban growth boundaries, it all kind of comes together to try to make it as easy as possible to be able to do that. So I would still put that support and fund efficient land use and transportation planning, but under the reducing the VMT.
Right. And that's a particularly urban kind of solution. So we need to think about rural solutions also, which I think are more transit oriented, small transit and, the kinds of things that work in a rural environment. Most
Absolutely.
of Oregon
and clean
doesn't
vehicles
have,
are going to be critical.
most of Oregon doesn't have any short trips. Right.
True enough.
I grew up in Central Oregon. I hear you. Yeah, I think there's solutions for both urban and rural areas for sure.
Yeah.
Commissioner Len.
Yeah, I think it is a little bit hard to sort. I think the draft, to try to be helpful, does have a lot of the things, the items that all of us included in our written comments. And so I did look at, the written comments from the other commissioners. I think, though, that it'd be helpful just to sort of review sort of where most of the tons come from in thinking about where our priorities are, how much real estate in our written document. Again, most of the tons come from the light duty sector, and
Yep.
most of the opportunities come from vehicle and fuel technology. The reason why, my understanding is the reason why there already exists a state goal related to per capita VMT is because you can't meet you can't meet our goals without addressing VMT, but most of the climate greenhouse gas reduction comes from the vehicle and the fuel side, and those policies are very much already in place for the light duty sector. Not as much for the heavy duty sector, so I agree with the elements to sort of add in more. I like the idea of the roadmap, for example. But we also should really recognize that the land use and the travel behavior side is also the most difficult to change. So I'd actually encourage us not to lead with that. Most of the opportunity comes on the vehicle and the fuel side. For example, in the written materials provided by DEQ, they provide us what I thought was really good information. They've actually had a 10% reduction goal for clean fuel standard. It's actually a really good success story. They've met in the 10 years from 2015 to 2025. They've met that 10% goal. That's been a successful program. And now they say they are planning to do rulemaking to up the goal, maybe up to 50%. So I think we should be supportive of something like that, where, there's actual evidence of making good progress. That's debate about the VMT. There's debate about like how much progress has been made and how difficult it is. But we can make a lot of progress with the vehicle and the fuel side.
I really appreciate your recognition of that. That's a And I think being able to talk about a success and let's, go to the next level, I think is super important. So thank you for that. So I don't know if we want to kind of scroll down a little bit more and so there were a number of different comments that were focused on medium and heavy duty transportation. And so I don't know whether we don't have to think about exactly how we organize these, but the fact that there's some market momentum on light duty vehicles, but and innovation to focus on that, but there's just a lot heavier lift with medium and heavy duty. So I don't know any feedback to specifically talk about that or kind of talk about the rural areas and how we should be thinking about the different policies relative to rural and rural or to rural and urban.
This made me think about one of our last recommendations in our last report was related to state vehicles and the conversion of the state to fleet vehicles, and the state sort of leading the way to show how to do it and helping maybe fuel demand and et cetera. I'm curious, that's not here. I don't know if we have any update on how the state is doing for their transition to electric vehicles. But that's something that the state actually can control and do, and maybe learn about how difficult it is, sort of what the market situation is. There aren't that many medium and heavy duty trucks that are electric. I mean, the market is not huge, right? Daimler just stopped making them, right? So, et cetera. So anyway, that's just a comment.
Yeah, no, I think that can go in the last agenda item, which is what information would it be helpful for us to have, and kind of getting a better sense of what's going on with the state fleet, I think would be super helpful.
Actually, this might be a good time to see if Jillian, who's on the call, Jillian's our transportation specialist with Odo. She may have an update regarding kind of state fleet progress in regards to what we just heard. I'm not sure if she's still on the call, however.
Or
I am still here. Thanks, Jeff.
Oh,
can you hear
Jillian.
me?
Yes.
Hi. Yeah, I don't have specific numbers for you. I think that we could track those down. I know that that's something they track at the Department of Administrative Services. I will say that every state agency is going to be a little bit different in terms of how easy or hard they find that sort of mandate to meet. I know there is not any funding available for state agencies to purchase electric vehicles. And so there is, of course, this cost difference between EVs and internal combustion engines. And so a lot of state agencies kind of refer to that requirement as an unfunded mandate and do have difficulty sort of making that cost justification. There's also costs associated with charging infrastructure and maintaining that charging infrastructure. So I know that that's something that would come up if you were to speak with, for example, Brian King, who sort of manages the state fleet from DAS, or the Department of Administrative Services. Still, we've seen, some amount of success. A lot of state agencies do have electric vehicles in their fleets. We're adding more charging infrastructure all the time, which you may or may not have seen if you've visited any of our lots in the Salem region. But yeah, again, I can get back to you with specific numbers in terms of, and I'll say too, I know there's some difficulty in procurement of those vehicles because the original equipment manufacturers or the vehicle manufacturers don't necessarily prioritize public agencies when they're deciding who to sell those vehicles to, because they can get a higher price on the retail market versus what they charge public agencies. And so sometimes public agencies are actually the last in line. And so if there are limited numbers of EVs available, you sort of have to wait your turn, and that can be difficult. So for example, when the Ford F-150 Lightning came out, there was interest. I know ODOT has a few of those in their fleet, but they were kind of difficult to get, and there was a long lead time. So there are barriers like that that exist. But I think the number one thing, and you'll hear this across the board, that would sort of help is just funding to support the additional purchase cost.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Commissioner Lynn.
Yeah, thank you for that information. And so sort of the segue, I agree that I think we should say explicitly funding support. We should encourage the legislature to continue funding some of the EV transition, the rebate programs. We know those programs run out of money. The charging infrastructure programs, we know that we've been, not, have uncertainty, I guess it's fair to say, about the federal money for those programs. And just I saved this because I wanted to show something to you. It's a little hard to see this with the Teams the way it works, but this is a postcard I received in the mail from my neighborhood. It's from Portland General Electric. It says, "Exciting news, EV charging coming soon to a curbside near you." And it's got pictures of how it's putting chargers on the electrical poles to make them neighborhood accessible. So here's probably a different funding source, PG Pacific, Gas, Portland Gas rather. But I think that we have this about market demand. I actually think the market demand is there, but we should also say something about funding explicitly to the legislature.
Portland General. California is Pacific Gas. We're Portland General Electric. Okay, let's scroll down a little bit more. I think but it's a really good point. And, kind of that thinking about funding, not just from the legislature, but how do we kind of collectively think about funding, I think is important. Commissioner Lamb, you talked about kind of clean fuels and ideas there. So we can build that out. We've heard a lot about reducing vehicle miles traveled and the goals that the state set around that. And, also that while there's been a kind of longer term decline, there's been a shorter term increase that probably needs a little more research. We've talked about the fact that and I don't know that the Fix It First policy is a subset of that or not, but certainly I think there's general support for a Fix It First policy, and so that.
Can I ask, hey Jeff and Chair McDonald, would it be helpful if I sent you by email just maybe a couple of suggested sentences in this TBD section on fuels?
Yeah,
I want
that'd be
to
great.
be helpful to you, so maybe, and I can do that offline.
Absolutely.
So do we want to be more explicit about encouraging insurance pricing and congestion pricing?
I think we do.
It was a rhetorical question, I guess, but yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, the current policy doesn't support that, either of those, right? And if we want to affect VMTs, that's going to be an important tool because, as was stated earlier, the economics make a big difference, and pricing is a powerful tool.
Absolutely. Yeah, and Commissioner Steckler, you really wanted to have us focus in on markets and pricing, but I don't think you included it in your list, which then maybe I missed it.
I think it's all under that generic. I would put the congestion pricing, how we implement Orgo, insurance pricing too, but that one feels a little bit like that's the insurance market is going to determine what that is.
But
Though
it's
how many
not
people
allowed in
actually,
Oregon. As I
is it not?
understand,
Oh,
it's not allowed. So we have to
okay,
allow
yeah,
it first.
yeah, that makes sense. So any of those particular things. I guess in the grand scheme of things, when it comes to like VMT, congestion pricing feels like it's going to be the most impactful, or even just thinking about how we implement Orgo and the opportunities there to both consider the total number of miles traveled as well as kind of location or like region and is it a internal combustion engine vehicle or is it an electric vehicle, and do we want to do something different
Yeah.
based on the impacts it has on the system?
Absolutely. Yep. Agreed. And I was interested to hear in the transportation visioning meeting that if we don't support rail service, we could add 13 million BMTs to I-5 a year, which I was just like, oh my gosh, can it get worse?
And you convert that to tons of carbon and it's pretty material number.
Yeah. Yes, for sure.
I mean, that's all about providing alternatives to the single occupancy vehicle is really what we're talking about. Same thing we've been talking about for 40 years, It's just gotten more pressing.
When are we going to do something about it?
Yeah, I know.
Hopefully in 2027, but not unless we really press. And then, I think we heard a fair amount around kind of better information to make decisions. Well, two things I think around new construction was better information about the impacts of new construction and costs, and that those were really important, and more transparency in that process. I think those were the things that came out.
So I read that one, and maybe I'm reading maybe it's a different issue, that right now when they make major transportation infrastructure investment decisions, climate is not a consideration in that decision. Okay, or the impact on carbon emissions is not part of the feasibility that ODOT does when they do a project. And maybe I'm wrong about that, but I don't think so.
I know that the STEP, which is the process to identify new construction, and
Right.
and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they are now, for the last 4 or 5 years, have been including carbon decisions, but carbon in the decision making, but I'm not sure how clear that process is.
And or how powerful
and
the
how-
modeling is that they're
Or how
using.
powerful, yeah. So that's something we might want to ask ODOT to follow up with us on.
Yeah.
Can I ask,
Commissioner Webb, yeah.
on that note, do we have any update, or my understanding was we were waiting on ODOT to both update and finalize their STS work as well as bring it to their commission. Is that what still we're trying to do? And then will we be able to see what they are producing that would inform our work?
My understanding, and I'm not sure who all is on the call, so if there's someone from ODOT that can clarify, but their meeting is the 15th of September, so after our next meeting. So we might need to have a placeholder for that, for some of their findings. My understanding from talking with them is that the big issues that they talked to us about in April are still the big issues. So we've got the big topic areas, and I think the thing that may change is kind of their assessment of where we are relative to the goals that have been set. So we'll have that information. One question I asked Jeff to track down was, if they're going to be presenting to their commission on the 15th, will some documents be available earlier for us to be able to look at? And I don't think we've gotten the answer yet on that, but we may need to put placeholders in and then fill it in.
Yeah. And if we have a planned third meeting of this committee, then presumably it would be after our September meeting and their September meeting. Maybe we could at least know that then we'd have a chance to add it to our discussion, whatever that new information is.
Absolutely. Jeff, anything you want to add to that?
No, that's a good plan. We'll get information to you as soon as we get it.
Thank you.
Great. So we're getting close to the end of our meeting. Are there any big topics that we didn't cover that we should be talking about? I mean, we didn't really talk a lot about equity, rural areas, but recognize that's an issue. We didn't talk a lot about marine and aviation. I think we agreed that those were smaller inputs to our overall missions. But Commissioner Steckler.
Yeah, I guess the one thing I should add, and I have to admit I'm still trying to better understand it, is kind of getting back to, and this is something I didn't put in the feedback, but as I've been doing a little bit more research around the transportation planning rule and the assumptions that is then required to flow through to local transportation system plans. And I just want to make sure that we're using the most relevant and kind of up-to-date information. And if just a few kind of informal conversations I've had implied that perhaps we're still using old assumptions that would be then a detriment if it is included in recent and kind of updates as they go on. And I wouldn't want to do that, but I feel like I need more information before really kind of crafting something. So on the transportation planning side of it, I just want to make sure that Oregon and local communities are using the best available data.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I have the same question that, I'm not completely clear what local communities are responsible for and how far that gets distributed out across Oregon. So appreciate that. Any other input? Jeff, can we go back to the agenda? I think we're close to, or a minute out, but I think and certainly if there are other questions that you have, send those to Jeff and I, and then we can share them in terms of refining and justifying the information that we put out there. What we shared today was not really supposed to be, here's a draft. That's not at all what it was. It was just trying to organize the information, and we'll Jeff and I'll kind of dig into that. If you do think of any topics that we're missing, or priorities amongst the different topics, whether they should be a subheading or a sub recommendation or a lead recommendation, feel free to provide that, and we'll construct something and get it out to you before we have our meeting on the 11th. We'll anticipate that we're going to spend a fair amount of our time on the 11th digging into what the different set of recommendations are, and hopefully you all will be able to provide some context of how we got to where we were at that meeting. And we'll get you kind of an agenda and some key areas of topics that I hope you guys will feel comfortable jumping in on. Any final thoughts?
That's going to be quite a meeting.
It's going to be quite a meeting. That it is. This whole thing is kind of a new process that we haven't really done before exactly this way. And I think it's hopefully sets the commission up to be able to not just develop a set of recommendations, but also advocate on behalf of those recommendations in a way that we maybe haven't been able to do before. So thank you for all of the great work that you did in advance of this meeting.
Well, thank you. And thanks to Jeff for listening and cobbling together.
You folks put together some great stuff. So thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.